The stale air of my sealed fallout shelter always tasted of ozone and recycled ambition. For years, it had been my sanctuary, a fortress against the trivialities of the surface world, a perfect crucible for observation. Here, deep beneath the earth, the only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors, each a window into the silent, majestic ballet of distant galaxies. I was Cole Chen, and my universe was the data scrolling across these screens, an endless tapestry of light years and cosmic dust. My days were a rhythm of precise calculation and patient waiting. I lived by the hum of the servers, the soft click of my keyboard, the quiet whir of the environmental controls keeping the oppressive weight of the earth above from crushing me. Every morning, I pored over the latest telemetry from the array, cross-referencing, extrapolating, searching for the subtle whispers of gravitational lensing or the faint blush of nascent star formation. It was a comfort, this meticulous order, this predictable unfolding of the cosmos, until it wasn't. The first hint was a flicker, an almost imperceptible deviation in the background radiation from a region of space I'd been monitoring for months. A vast, empty expanse between two galactic clusters. Beautiful in its starkness, but scientifically unremarkable. I designated it Null-7 in my logs, a placeholder for nothingness. Yet there it was, a tiny ripple in the expected flatline. My initial reaction was annoyance. Equipment malfunction, I thought, or perhaps a transient solar flare interfering with the sensors. I ran diagnostics on the primary receivers, then the secondary. Every component checked out, green lights across the board. I recalibrated the filters, adjusted the gain, and reprocessed the raw data. The ripple persisted, a stubborn, almost defiant little blip. I leaned closer to the main display, my reflection a pale, intense ghost in the glass. The air in the shelter felt suddenly heavier, the hum of the machinery a fraction louder. This wasn't noise. It had a signature, faint but distinct. My fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up historical data, comparing it to current readings. For 2 weeks, the anomaly had been growing, a slow, insidious creep from the baseline. It wasn't random, it was structured. My scientific curiosity, usually a calm, methodical current, began to churn into a torrent. I neglected my usual analysis of other celestial bodies, my attention consumed by Null-7. Breakfast became a forgotten ritual, lunch a handful of nutrient paste, consumed without thought while my eyes remained glued to the monitors. I felt a familiar thrill, the kind that comes from standing on the precipice of a genuine discovery, but laced with a nascent, unsettling unease. The signal wasn't just growing, it was changing. It wasn't a static blip, nor was it a simple harmonic oscillation. It was complex, a series of modulated pulses like a cosmic drumbeat echoing across unimaginable distances. But from what? Nothing. The very definition of emptiness. Days bled into nights within the sealed fallout shelter, marked only by the shifting hues of the monitor displays and the automatic cycling of the air purifiers. My determination hardened, my resolve to understand this impossible phenomenon eclipsing everything else. I wrote new algorithms, designed custom filters, pushing the processing power of my systems to their limits. I stripped away layers of cosmic static, filtered out gravitational distortions, until only the pure, unadulterated signal remained. What emerged from the digital noise was breathtaking and horrifying. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a sequence. A series of intricate, repeating fluctuations in the fabric of space-time, manifesting as an electromagnetic signature. It defied every known principle of astrophysics. This wasn't a natural emission from a distant quasar, nor the remnant echo of a supernova. It had no thermal signature, no gravitational footprint beyond the signal itself. It was pure information, broadcast from the heart of cosmic nothingness. I stared at the screen, my breath held tight in my chest. The pulses were distinct, each one a unique waveform, yet together they formed a coherent, deliberate progression. It was like listening to a language spoken by the universe itself, but a language I had no right to hear. My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with everything I knew. It was impossible. Absolutely, unequivocally impossible. And yet there it was, blinking, waiting. The vastness of space, which had always been a source of intellectual comfort, suddenly felt like an immense, indifferent eye staring back. The signal wasn't just a scientific anomaly, it felt like a deliberate act of perception, a message from something that should not exist, from a place where nothing should be. Here, deep beneath the earth, the only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors, each a window into the cold, indifferent vastness above. Now, one of those windows showed something that threatened to crack the very foundation of my meticulously ordered existence. My fingers, usually steady, hovered over the input console. The anomaly, a jagged scar across the otherwise predictable spectrum, pulsed on the central screen. I told myself it was an error. It had to be. Decades of data, thousands of galactic observations, all pointed to a universe governed by elegant, unbreakable laws. This was a vulgar smudge on the cosmic canvas. I initiated the first battery of diagnostic filters. Noise reduction algorithms, gravitational lensing compensators, atmospheric interference models. I threw every standard procedure at it. Each subroutine word processed and reported back with chilling consistency. No anomaly detected in equipment function. The signal was real. It wasn't a phantom of failing optics or a corrupted data stream. My brow furrowed, a familiar tension tightening the muscles in my jaw. I adjusted the spectral analysis parameters, narrowing the focus, zooming in on the impossible frequencies. The energy signature was faint, barely above the background hum of the universe, yet it possessed a clarity that screamed defiance. It lacked the characteristic dispersal of natural phenomena. Its profile was too sharp, too precise. I had spent my life chasing the elegant truths of the cosmos, the silent ballet of nebulae, and the thunderous birth of stars. This signal felt like a discordant shriek in that symphony. I leaned closer, my reflection a pale, distorted ghost in the monitor's glass. My eyes, usually dry and focused, felt hot, prickling with the strain of hours without blinking. The sealed fallout shelter, my sanctuary, now felt like a pressurized chamber, the walls closing in, not from physical constriction but from the weight of this burgeoning impossibility. "Run a coherence test," I muttered to myself, my voice raspy from disuse. The system obeyed, projecting a complex grid over the data. If this was random noise, the grid would show uniform distribution, chaotic entropy. Instead, faint lines began to coalesce, connecting disparate points, hinting at a pattern that shouldn't exist in such a barren region of space. My breath hitched. It was like finding a perfect snowflake in a blizzard, then realizing the snowflake was etched with microscopic, deliberate symbols. The signal wasn't just there, it was structured. I dedicated the next several hours, then the next day, to stripping away every layer of cosmic static, every known astrophysical signature. I cross-referenced against every catalog, every database, every theoretical model I had ever encountered. The results were always the same. Unknown origin, impossible characteristics. The impossibility wasn't just a scientific hurdle, it was a philosophical assault. It meant everything I knew, everything I believed about the universe's fundamental laws was incomplete, perhaps even profoundly wrong. If the universe held such a profound secret, I would pry it open. I began to isolate specific segments of the anomalous data, looking for repetition, for any kind of sequence that deviated from pure randomness. It was a painstaking process, like sifting through an endless beach for a single grain of uniquely shaped sand. Then, buried deep within the seemingly chaotic fluctuations, I saw it. A series of pulses, a rhythmic rise and fall in the energy spectrum, repeated. Not perfectly, not like a simple sine wave, but with subtle variations, like a complex musical phrase played with slight improvisation. It was too intricate to be an accident, too consistent to be natural. My fingers flew across the keyboard, refining the filters, amplifying the repeating segment. On a fresh screen, the pattern blossomed into view, a series of nested oscillations, each cycle slightly altering the next, yet undeniably returning to a foundational structure. It was a language, perhaps, a code, a deliberate articulation of something. This wasn't a phenomenon, it was a communication, or, at the very least, a signature. Something made this, something sent this. From a region of space that should have been silent, dead, and empty, a message was being broadcast, and it was waiting for me, Cole Chen, to perceive it. The universe wasn't just larger than I imagined, it was stranger, more deliberate, and infinitely more dangerous. My obsession, a nascent seed just hours ago, now exploded into full, terrifying bloom. I had to understand. Here, deep beneath the earth, the only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors, each a window into the silent, indifferent vastness I sought to comprehend. I'd been awake for what felt like 3 days straight, fueled by synthetic nutrient paste and an escalating, almost frantic obsession with the signal. The anomaly, as I'd begun to call it, was a constant thrum in the back of my mind, a rhythmic pulse that echoed the impossible data scrolling across my primary display. My eyes burned, but I couldn't tear them away. Every calculation, every spectral analysis only deepened the impossible. It was there, a deliberate pattern etched into the void between galaxies, and it shouldn't exist. The first oddity was subtle, easily dismissed. I was reviewing a particularly complex data stream, trying to correlate the signal's harmonic frequencies with known stellar phenomena, when a faint, high-pitched whine scraped at the edge of my hearing. It was like the distant feedback from an ancient amplifier, barely perceptible yet persistent. I paused, tilting my head. The shelter systems were meticulously maintained, silent except for the low whir of the environmental controls. I checked the atmospheric processors, the power conduits, all green. I frowned, attributing it to auditory fatigue, a byproduct of too many hours in a sterile, sound-dampened environment. My ears were probably playing tricks on me. I rubbed my temples, then plunged back into the numbers. Later, I reached for my data slate, a sleek obsidian rectangle where I'd meticulously logged my daily progress. It wasn't on the console where I distinctly remembered placing it. I searched my desk, then the small, cramped sleeping alcove, my frustration mounting with each fruitless sweep. My mind felt like a sieve, the details of the past hour, even the past day, slipping through its mesh. Had I left it by the nutrient dispenser? No, my movements were always precise, ordered. This was unlike me. I finally found it tucked beneath a stack of printouts, a place I never would have put it. A cold prickle traced its way down my spine, but I shook it off. Exhaustion, pure and simple. My brain, a finely tuned instrument, was simply protesting the lack of rest. That night, when I finally succumbed to sleep, the dreams began. They weren't the usual stress-induced nightmares of equations failing or equipment breaking. These were different. There was no up, no down, just an overwhelming sense of nothing. And then the signal. Not as data, but as a visceral sensation, a slow, deliberate pull. It wasn't a physical force, but a profound internal tug, as if the core of my being was being stretched, attenuated. I saw patterns, not with my eyes, but with some deeper, unnamed sense intricate. Fractal geometries that shifted and reformed, not in light, but in the absence of light, each iteration more complex, more alien. I woke with a gasp, the taste of ash in my mouth, the memory of that impossible emptiness clinging to me like a shroud. The high-pitched whine returned the next day, clearer this time, oscillating with a subtle rhythm that seemed to mirror the anomaly's pulse. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a vibration in the very air. I ran diagnostics on every system, every circuit, every sensor in the shelter. Nothing, not a single anomaly, yet I could hear it. It became a constant companion, a thin, unnerving thread woven into the fabric of my perception. My shelter was lit by cool, consistent LED panels designed to eliminate flicker. A momentary, elongated distortion in the corner of the room, a fleeting impression of movement just beyond the edge of a monitor. Each time I snapped my gaze towards it, the illusion vanished, leaving only the sterile, unchanging geometry of the shelter. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was losing my grip. I tried to rationalize it all. Sleep deprivation, certainly. The intense focus, the isolation. These were known stressors. I even considered a mild carbon monoxide leak, though the shelter's air filtration was flawless. But the feeling, the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distinct impression of being watched, it transcended mere fatigue. It wasn't just my eyes playing tricks or my ears ringing, that the anomaly now was observing me. I'd walk through a pocket of frigid air, then step into warmth again, as if an invisible door had opened and closed. My scientific mind screamed for an explanation, but my gut churned with a primal fear I hadn't felt since childhood. The signal wasn't just data anymore. It felt like a presence, a vast, indifferent consciousness that had finally perceived my perception of it, and was now reaching back, its tendrils not of light or matter, but of pure, unsettling influence. My sanctuary was becoming a cage, and I, the solitary observer, was becoming the observed. The impossible signal pulsed on my main monitor, a rhythmic thrum of data that defied every known law of physics. My initial shock had curdled into a cold, scientific resolve. This wasn't some phantom, some glitch in the delicate ballet of my instruments. This was real, and it was mine to understand. The stale air of my sealed fallout shelter always tasted of ozone and recycled ambition, but now it felt charged, electric. My sanctuary, my fortress, was about to be tested. I hunched over the main console, fingers flying across the holographic interface. My first step, cross-referencing. I accessed the global astronomical databases, sifting through decades of sky surveys, looking for anything that remotely resembled the pattern I was seeing. A faint echo, a discarded anomaly, a data point too strange to be categorized. The vast digital libraries of human observation scrolled past, an endless tapestry of stars and gas clouds, each pixel a distant sun, each line a record of light years traveled. Hours bled into days. My eyes burned, but the hum of the servers, a constant, low thrum against the concrete walls of the sealed fallout shelter, was a familiar, reassuring drone, until it wasn't. A flicker. A momentary blanking of the secondary display, then the tertiary. I dismissed it as a power fluctuation, common enough in the shelter's aging systems, a minor hiccup in the complex network of cables and circuits. But then, as I tried to download a specific dataset from the Kepler archive, a region of space near the void from which my signal emanated, the transfer stalled. Not a network error, not a file not found. Just stalled. The progress bar froze, a digital flatline against the vibrant starfield. I tried again and again. Each attempt met with the same silent refusal. The system logs showed no errors, no dropped packets, no external interference. Yet, the data remained inaccessible. A digital wall erected between me and the information I needed. I switched to another database, then another. The same result. Files that were publicly available that I had accessed countless times before without issue now seemed to exist in a phantom state, visible but untouchable. It was a sense of being deliberately thwarted. The isolation of the sealed fallout shelter, once my greatest asset, now felt like a cage. I needed another pair of eyes, another mind to confirm what I was seeing, or to tell me I was deluded, but who? And how? The nature of the signal was so utterly impossible, so fundamentally disruptive to all known cosmology, that presenting it directly would be professional suicide. I crafted a careful email, a theoretical query to a former senior colleague, a man whose skepticism was legendary but whose intellect I respected. I asked for his thoughts on potential natural phenomena that could mimic such a signature, knowing full well there were none. I agonized over every word, every nuance, trying to sound detached, academic, anything but the frantic man I felt myself becoming. His reply came 2 days later, curt and dismissive. He suggested I check my instrument calibration, referenced a known cosmic ray background noise, ended with a polite but firm recommendation to step away from the screens for a while, Cole. He didn't even dignify it with a detailed explanation, just a wave of the hand across the digital ether. It was exactly what I had expected, yet it stung with an unexpected ferocity. He hadn't seen the data, hadn't heard the impossible rhythm, but he had already judged it, and me, as faulty. The shelter, with its constant hum and recycled air, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. There was I truly losing my grip. There was the pressure of years of solitary observation finally fracturing my mind. The signal, however, remained on my main monitor, unwavering, undeniable. It was there. And the more I tried to push it into the established framework of science, the more that framework seemed to buckle and twist around me, threatening to collapse. Driven by a desperate need for a third-party perspective, a final, objective arbiter, I decided to prepare a sanitized, abstracted data package to send to a different institution just the raw frequency and amplitude readings. Stripped of context, presented as an unidentified astronomical transient. As I compiled the files, a warning flashed across my console. Data integrity compromised. I frowned, running diagnostics. No issues detected. My systems were clean, secure. But then I looked at the actual files. Blocks of the signal, critical segments of its unique pattern, were gone, replaced by static. Not random noise, not the white hiss of a dead channel, but a deliberate pattern static that mimicked the original signal's rhythm, distorted, a grotesque echo. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat, the stale air suddenly thick and heavy. This wasn't a system error. This wasn't a power surge. This was targeted. It was as if the signal itself was actively resisting being disseminated, actively fighting against being understood by anyone but me. The impossible signal wasn't just an anomaly. It was a sentinel, guarding a secret it did not want revealed. And I, Cole Chen, was trapped, alone with a knowledge that was slowly, meticulously, corrupting everything I thought I knew. The pulse from the main monitor was no longer just data. It was a drumbeat in the sealed fallout shelter, a relentless rhythm that had burrowed deep into my bones. Days, weeks. Time had become a meaningless concept down here, a discarded skin. The shelter, once a sanctuary of focused isolation, now felt like a tomb. The air, recycled and stale, tasted of metal and something else, a faint metallic tang that I couldn't place, yet knew wasn't right. My eyes, perpetually strained, burned, reflecting the green glow of the screens. I pushed away from the console, the worn, swivel chair groaning in protest. My legs felt like foreign objects, stiff and unwilling. A dull ache throbbed behind my eyes. I needed sleep, a proper meal, anything to break the suffocating grip of this place. But the signal, It called to me, a siren song sung in impossible frequencies. The first flicker came as I stood by the small, fold-down cot. The single overhead fluorescent light, usually a steady, anemic glow, seemed to stutter, momentarily plunging the far corner of the shelter into absolute shadow. Then it returned, brighter, sharper. My head swam. Had it done that? Or was it just my exhaustion playing tricks? I rubbed my temples, the skin clammy. I tried to eat, forcing a tasteless ration bar down my throat, but the edges of my vision blurred. The stark white walls of the shelter began to ripple like water disturbed by an unseen stone. I blinked hard. They solidified, but the image lingered. An afterimage burned onto my retinas. The rhythmic thrum from the monitor seemed to amplify, resonating not through the speakers, but directly inside my skull. That night's sleep offered no respite. It was a descent into a waking nightmare, a fractured reel of impossible images. I saw patterns, not on the screens, but woven into the very fabric of my dreams. Impossible geometries twisting into and out of existence. Structures that defied Euclidean space, vast and intricate, yet utterly alien. They folded upon themselves, infinitely regressing, then exploding outward in silent, furious light. I jolted awake, drenched in a cold sweat, the memory of those forms pressing against my mind like an unseen weight. I stumbled back to the console, the urgency a burning coal in my gut. The signal was still there, unwavering. My eyes, now accustomed to the green luminescence, traced the intricate, non-repeating sequences. And then I saw it. Not a single pattern, but a nested hierarchy. A pattern within a pattern, not in a mathematical sense, but a conceptual one. It wasn't a message in any human tongue, but a fundamental reordering of information itself, a grammar of perception. My mind, frayed and desperate, began to grasp its unsettling coherence. It was like learning a language by having it rewrite the structure of my own thoughts. Every time I thought I understood a segment, the next sequence would subtly alter the rules, demanding a new way of seeing. It was beautiful in its terrifying self-consistency, a perfect alien machine. The disorientation intensified. The shelter, which I knew to be a compact 10x 15 feet, began to feel vast and cavernous one moment, then impossibly small, pressing in on me the next. I'd walk towards the small, built-in sink, convinced it was just a few steps away, only to find myself bumping into the far wall, having misjudged the distance entirely. It pulsed, a slow, viscous expansion, then receded, leaving behind a faint, shimmering outline of something that was not there a moment before. It was a momentary, impossible aperture, a tear in the fabric of the shelter itself, offering a glimpse into an absence. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them. The corner was just a corner, stark and unchanging. I leaned against the cold metal of the console, my knees weak. There was I finally breaking. There was the isolation, the lack of proper sleep, the sheer impossible weight of the signal finally eroding my mind. They were calling me, promising something more than just understanding. Reveal/discovery. I saw it then, a clarity born of utter exhaustion and a mind pushed to its breaking point. It wasn't information about nothingness, but nothingness manifested as information. It was the absence given form, a pattern of non-existence that, when perceived, began to unmake the very framework of perception itself. It wasn't a message to be deciphered, but a fundamental operating system of oblivion slowly installing itself into my consciousness. It wasn't a joke. The alien logic was no longer just on the screen. It was echoing in the empty spaces of my own mind, rearranging my thoughts, redefining my reality. I gravely questioned my sanity, yet the patterns had never been clearer. They were mine now, and I was theirs. Days, weeks. The sealed fallout shelter, once a sanctuary of focused isolation, now felt like a coffin, each thrum of the anomaly's signature vibration a nail hammered into its lid. My eyes, perpetually gritty, traced the intricate, non-repeating patterns across the primary display. I had stripped away layers of noise, filtered out every known astrophysical phenomenon, and what remained was this, a pure, unadulterated echo from the impossible void. I had been searching for a language, a code, a mathematical sequence that would unlock its secrets. I had tried every cipher, every logical permutation, every fractal algorithm I knew. My fingers, numb from endless input, hovered over the holographic interface. My mind, a frayed rope, still strained against the impossible. The signal wasn't just complex, it was alien in its very structure, designed without the implicit assumptions of cause and effect, sender and receiver that defined all human communication. I leaned back, the cheap plastic chair groaning in protest. The air in the sealed fallout shelter was stale, recycled, tasting of metal and my own desperation. On a secondary screen, a three-dimensional representation of the signal's waveform twisted and writhed, a shimmering, impossible knot of energy. For weeks, I had seen it as a source, something generating the signal. But what if that was the fundamental error? What if it wasn't a broadcast from something, but a structural resonance of something? My gaze drifted to the periphery of the display, to the tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuations I had initially dismissed as background noise, too faint to be significant. They were like static, like the shimmering distortion at the edge of a dying star. But something in the relentless, indifferent rhythm of the main pulse had made me revisit them, not as noise, but as an integral counterpoint. I zoomed in, manipulating the controls with an almost unconscious fluidity. The faint static resolved into a series of incredibly rapid, infinitesimally small oscillations. They weren't random. They weren't noise. They were nullifications. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a slow, insidious chill that had nothing to do with the shelter's regulated temperature. I had spent my life studying the creation of matter, the expansion of the universe, the grand, beautiful tapestry of existence. But what I was seeing now, it defied everything. These tiny oscillations weren't adding to the primary signal, they were subtracting from it. They were moments of perfect, instantaneous non-existence, meticulously woven into the fabric of the larger pulse. I ran a differential analysis, comparing the primary signal's theoretical waveform to the actual observed one. The software highlighted the discrepancies, not as errors, but as precise, deliberate omissions. Each omission corresponded perfectly to one of the faint, rapid oscillations. It wasn't a message being sent. It was a message being erased, continuously, perpetually. My breath hitched. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, felt like it was crumbling stone by stone. The signal wasn't transmitting information about something. It was something. It was the blueprint of a cosmic mechanism, a vast, indifferent process that wasn't creating but unmaking. The primary pulse, the grand, rhythmic thrum I had been chasing, was a constant, fundamental affirmation of being. And these tiny, precise nullifications were the equally fundamental, equally constant affirmation of non-being. This wasn't a message from a distant intelligence. This was the universe's true, underlying hum. It was the sound of reality being continuously defined by its own negation. It was the cosmic equivalent of a constant, self-sustaining process of decay, a fundamental truth that existence was merely a temporary, fragile fluctuation in an eternal, perfected state of nothingness. I stared at the screen, the data now screaming its horrifying revelation. It was full of this process, full of this relentless structural undoing. Our reality, our galaxies, our very consciousness. We were just ephemeral ripples on the surface of something that was constantly, systematically returning to its true, non-existent state. The signal wasn't a call for help or a greeting. It was the sound of the cosmic fabric unraveling, not violently, but with an elegant, indifferent precision that preceded and superseded all concepts of life, death, or purpose. A laugh, dry and brittle, escaped my lips. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of pure, unadulterated horror. I had sought knowledge, and I had found it. But it wasn't the kind of knowledge that expanded the mind. It was the kind that shattered it. Everything I believed, everything humanity believed about its place in the cosmos was a delusion. We were not part of a grand design. We were an incidental glitch, a brief, anomalous flicker against an eternal backdrop of perfected non-existence. The sealed fallout shelter, my sanctuary, now felt like a stage for my own unraveling. I had pulled back the veil, and what lay beyond wasn't monstrous in a way I could comprehend or fight. It was simply true. And that truth rendered my existence, my very perception, an impossible temporary error. There was no going back. The rhythm of the monitor, once a drumbeat, now felt like the slow, deliberate ticking down of an impossible clock, counting the moments until my own and everything's inevitable structural nullification. Days, weeks. The sealed fallout shelter, once a sanctuary of focused research, now felt like a tomb or perhaps a crucible. My eyes, raw and bloodshot, traced the patterns on the screen, the impossible signal's intricate dance of light and shadow. I had stopped trying to find a mathematical explanation, a physical law it adhered to. That was the old Cole Chen, the one who believed in the ordered universe. The new Cole Chen understood that some truths weren't discovered. They were perceived. A tremor ran through my hand, not from fatigue, but from the cold dread that had taken root in my chest. I had been feeding the signal into an experimental neural interface, a device I'd designed for accelerated pattern recognition. It bypassed the conscious mind, allowing the subconscious to sift through torrents of information. A dangerous shortcut, I knew, but desperation had long since eclipsed caution. What I'd found wasn't a formula, but a grammar, a syntax of perception. The sealed fallout shelter was utterly silent save for the hum of the equipment, yet a faint, high-pitched whine now seemed to resonate from the very air itself. My gaze drifted from the screen to the reinforced concrete wall beside me. Before it was just a wall, solid, reassuring. Now I saw a shimmer. It wasn't a trick of light. The light in the sealed fallout shelter was consistent, sterile. This was an interference, a bleed. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them, forcing my mind to reject the vision. It persisted. The shimmer, a ripple in the fabric of what I'd always understood as reality, was undeniably there. My breath hitched. They were glimpses, and I, in my arrogance, had plugged its language directly into my brain. The patterns weren't just data points, they were instructions. They were a key retuning my sensory organs to a frequency previously unfathomable. The nothing between galaxies, that vast, silent expanse I dedicated my life to observing, wasn't empty. It was full. Filled with something ancient, something indifferent, something that had always been there, just beyond the reach of human perception. And now I could almost see it. My head throbbed. The knowledge was a contagion, burning away the comfortable lies of my scientific training. How could I reconcile this? My rational mind screamed for evidence, for empirical verification, but the evidence was now my own perception, irrevocably altered. The sealed fallout shelter, once a bastion of logic, became a stage where the curtain had been pulled back, revealing a terrifying, unseen audience. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and moved towards the shimmer on the wall. My hand trembled as I reached out, hesitating just before touching the air. It felt dense, like pushing against water, but invisible. The signal hummed louder in my ears, not through the speakers, but from within my skull. It was guiding me, showing me what to look for, what to see. The sealed fallout shelter's air grew heavy, thick with a presence I couldn't name. It wasn't malevolent in a human sense, but utterly alien, unfathomably vast, and profoundly indifferent. That indifference was the most terrifying aspect. It wasn't actively trying to hurt me, but its mere proximity, its bleed-through into my reality, was an act of cosmic violation. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if countless unseen eyes were now fixed on me. Had I merely observed the signal, or had I, by decoding its language, invited its attention? The sealed fallout shelter, designed to keep the world out, now felt like a fragile shell, a thin membrane separating me from them, and they were no longer distant. They were here, brushing against the edges of my reality, made visible by the very instrument I'd created to study them. A shudder ran through me. I wasn't just perceiving an alien reality, I was perceived by it. The faint resonance in the walls intensified, becoming a low thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor into my bare feet. It was the sound of something vast and unfeeling breathing. I stumbled back, knocking against my desk, sending a stack of printouts scattering. The paper fluttered, landing on the cold floor, and for a horrifying instant, I saw the shimmer ripple over them, distorting the text. It wasn't just the air, it was everything. The sealed fallout shelter itself was becoming translucent to another reality. I was trapped, not by the heavy steel door, but by the horrific expansion of my own consciousness. The signal pulsed, a triumphant, silent roar within my mind, an invitation to a perception I could never unsee, a truth that would surely unravel me completely. Days, weeks. The sealed fallout shelter, once a sanctuary of focused research, had become a crucible, forging me into something else entirely. My mind, once a meticulously organized library of cosmic truths, now felt like a storm-tossed sea, each wave a fragment of the signal crashing against the shores of my dwindling sanity. I paced the cramped space, the fluorescent lights humming a sickly lullaby. My fingers traced the cold steel of the consoles, the familiar buttons and switches feeling alien beneath my touch. The signal, that impossible whisper from the void, had evolved. It was no longer just a frequency. It was a presence, vast and indifferent, pressing against the very membranes of my perception. I had to do something more than just listen. I had to engage. Or perhaps, in my desperation, I simply needed to respond. An illogical yet utterly compelling idea had taken root in the fractured garden of my thoughts. I needed to transmit. Not just passively receive, but to send back, to mirror the pattern, to create a resonance. If it was a language, I would attempt to speak it. If it was a question, I would offer an answer. My hands, trembling with a mix of exhaustion and manic resolve, moved to the primary transmission array. The equipment was not designed for this, but I was beyond adherence to design specifications. I bypassed safety protocols, rerouted power conduits, and manually adjusted the phase modulators. Sweat slicked my forehead, stinging my eyes, but I barely noticed. Each click of a dial, each flick of a switch, felt like a sacred ritual. The air in the sealed fallout shelter thickened, charged with a strange potential. The hum of the machinery intensified, a low growl beneath the signal's ceaseless thrum. As I worked, the monitors around me began to flicker, not just with static, but with impossible geometries. Lines of light, previously abstract representations of data, now twisted into Escher-like structures, shifting and reforming in patterns that defied Euclidean space. The colors bled, vibrant and unnatural, staining the display with hues I had no names for. I tightened the final connection, my breath catching in my throat. This was it. The moment of truth. My finger hovered over the activation button, a single stark red circle amongst a constellation of green and amber. Before I could press it, a wave of pressure slammed into me, not from the air, but from within my skull. It was a silent concussion, a soundless roar that vibrated through my bones, shaking me to my core. The drumbeat of the signal in my mind accelerated, becoming a frantic, overwhelming deluge. Then the monitors didn't just flicker, they fractured. The impossible geometries on the screen seemed to peel away from the glass, shimmering into the air, ephemeral and terrifying. They weren't projections, they were there. Hovering inches from my face, vast, silent structures of light that shifted with the signal's intensifying rhythm. They were complex beyond comprehension, yet utterly devoid of meaning, like the skeletal framework of a reality not meant for human eyes. This wasn't just data anymore. This was a direct manifestation. My attempt to engage, to communicate, had not been a step towards understanding. It had been an invitation, and something was accepting. The air in the sealed fallout shelter grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. It wasn't other entities in the way one might imagine figures or forms. It was the pattern itself that had become sentient, or rather, it had always been, and now I was finally perceiving its true, horrifying scale. The shifting light structures pulsed, and with each pulse a new layer of reality seemed to peel away. And my desperate attempt to interact had not drawn its attention to me, but had instead allowed it to draw me into it. The structures of light expanded, coalescing, not into a shape, but into an overwhelming sensation of presence, a silent, indifferent gaze that stretched beyond the boundaries of the universe. I wasn't just seeing it, I was feeling it, an unmaking force seeping into my very consciousness. It was the ultimate inescapable truth. The anomaly wasn't waiting to be understood, it was simply waiting to be perceived, and in that perception to consume. And I, Cole Chen, had opened the door. The sealed fallout shelter, my sanctuary, had become its antechamber.